And there we go. We should be live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Love First Christians Bible study. We're still calling it the Bible study. It's once a week at this point, but Bibles and current events. I'm Hody Johns. I'm here with Aaron Goss. Aaron, I almost don't want to ask how you're doing today, but I hope it's good despite everything else. How are you?
I'm doing well enough. Yeah, I'm doing well enough.
Yeah, sometimes it's our loved ones that are not doing well, but we ourselves are doing okay. Our neighbors are in a bit of trouble, but that's the state of the world these days. Aaron, we'll start off with some Bible stuff. I know you're kind of getting caught up still. I did want to say, and this kind of dates back to what we were talking about last week, but I did not know the story of Hagar as detailed as I should have. Now, there's not consensus on this, but I do want to offer this to listeners. Apparently, Hagar, according to, in fact, this is going to sound like, it's going to sound anti-Jewish, but this is from rabbinical scholars, from rabbis, from Jews, and not like anti-Semite Jews, like real scholarly Jews. But I guess Hagar's real name is likely to be Keturah. And Hagar itself means stranger. And the sad part about that word is we don't know if it means stranger because they tried to that her name was Hagar, and to dehumanize her, they gave her a name that means stranger, or she's been so dehumanized, the word Hagar has come to mean stranger. Now, the real sad part about this story, Aaron, is that, as we kind of noted last week, boy, a lot of these biblical people are villains and they've got real problems. And it turns out that Abraham actually loved Keturah / Hagar. I'll call her Hagar for the sake of shorthand, but loved this Hagar person, and actually like kind of got remarried to her after the passing of Sarah and readopted like Ishmael back into his family because he genuinely loved her. I am a little stunned at this revelation. And again, not overwhelming consensus, but strong possibility in this case. When you look her up, like it's just there on Wikipedia for all to see, for example. This isn't like me diving deep into the details. So it kind of looks like they've gone a little too hard on making Abraham like a total villain. Now, you and I talked about how that is the point of a lot of this Old Testament stuff, is that the Jews did not earn God's love. God's love was given to them, and that is important to note. But it seems like they went a little overboard to the point where I think they almost demonized Abraham a little too much. I think this story would have lightened it up a little bit, I guess. Abraham's done plenty of messed up things. I don't need another messed up thing that he did, like, to me. Aaron, any thoughts that you have about that?
Yeah, I mean, that does put him in a slightly better light. It's sort of like when you find out, like, the founding father actually loved their slaves. It's one of those bittersweet, you like mostly negative, but somewhat like there's a silver lining at least. Um, yeah, I mean, even remarrying her after the fact, like it almost makes it like, well, I was lonely, and so I took damaged goods back as you know, I don't know.
It's still not
It's
perfectly great, of course.
yeah.
I would love more information about this. I would love it if somebody had a video camera set up there and I could like go back and rewatch like exactly what happened. But I just figured I'd offer that up since I know we kind of covered that last week, and this was new information to me this week. As far as this week's readings, I was glad to get into Joseph, who is a still problematic-ish person, but not as like problematic as what we've read so far. He's not a rapist. He's not a slaver. He's he is very he has some problems in his youth with making his brothers jealous, and even his dad's like, don't tell people dreams like that, dude. That's messed up. But a rather small era to have. And I think at this point where we are in Genesis, he's kind of our true biblical hero. Any thoughts that you have about Joseph?
So I've only just gotten into
Okay.
I've read the chapter with him as a child, and it ended right where he was getting sold into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about where I got to before I ran out of time, because I started reading 20 minutes before the service, before we started.
It's all good. And any thoughts just kind of about Joseph? I mean, you know the general plot.
Yeah,
Any thoughts about like the Joseph story offhand?
I definitely concur with you that he's definitely better than his father and grandfather and great grandfather.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think cool to kind of have somebody who, I think we've had people who are really bad with moments of good, and it's nice to have somebody who's good with moments of bad.
Yeah.
It's a refreshing change of pace, and I think it's, as I mentioned last time, it's really tough to give somebody a Bible and have them start with Genesis. That's a bummer of a beginning there, and so I think Joseph coming up is very refreshing, even to me as somebody who's read this book a bunch of times. The first part's a bit of a slog. I get the idea. I think even as I get the idea that we're trying to demonstrate these people are bad people, did not earn God's love. God's love comes to us anyway. But I think with that moral in there, you're just like, man, I get what the point of all this is, but this is really rough. Our next rough patch is probably going to be somewhere in Leviticus. And it, again, that's one of those, if you understand why biblical law is there and why these, Levitical law, I guess. Yeah. Why Levitical law exists. Yeah. But you're going to spend a lot of chapters being like, right, but we don't do this anymore. Right. We're not making women on their periods walk away from us while we're hiking, and we're not, refusing to eat shellfish or whatever. It's, a lot of mixing fabrics and all that stuff. And so I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of, boy, this is heinously boring, but it's part of the Bible. There's no sense in dancing around it. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that I was actually able to read. Okay. So Isaac wrestling God.
Oh yeah.
Talk to me about that. Like, that was Genesis 32:24.
Yeah. Isaac wrestling with God until God dislocates his hip.
Right?
Yeah. and then he's like, yeah. So this is kind of a cool story a little bit, because I think we are so used to, I think we hear about wrestling a lot and we think of like violence or competition. And this is kind of a friendly wrestling when Jacob is wrestling with God. And yeah, it refers to him specifically as God, although in some translations this gets translated to angel, but the words are for God. So, and the way he talks to him is like, hey, I've wrestled with God, like talks about in the name of the place. So when we talk about this, now, the easy way to go over this is kind of a modern reading, which is when we say somebody's wrestling with something, they're like trying to come to grips with it, right? And all of us, in a sense, are trying to come to grips with God, right? Like we're trying to figure it out. And Jacob does not want to stop, right? Like he's pulling an all-night wrestling match here. We're like, no, I am not letting you go. And he actually is verbally more than just symbolically is being like, no, I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to figure you out, right? Like give me some wisdom, give me your information, tell me more about you and who you are. And like that is kind of eluding him, and that's something that we kind of spend our whole lives doing, is trying to understand the nature of God and it kind of being elusive to us a little bit. And we're supposed to be inspired at this moment by Jacob, who is like, no, I'm not letting it go. I'm going to keep going until I've kind of come to grips with it. Now, coming to grips with it, in this case, God ends up dislocating Jacob's hip. And
well, like so you're viewing it as entirely metaphorical. It wasn't a literal wrestling match. It was more of a mental, like.
No, I believe both. I believe that it is a thing that literally happened, which is like a symbolic thing. I guess it's yes, it really happened. Um, but it is also to be, the message from it is to be taken symbolically as well, I guess. So I do believe he actually did wrestle with God, or at least some avatar of God. Um, this is a problematic reading for a lot of people. We get told later that God kind of has trouble like being in front of people. Well, I shouldn't say God doesn't have trouble. People have trouble being in front of God without like getting vaporized.
Right.
So like, some people are like, well, if that's what's going on there, then what is he wrestling here? Is it actually God? Is it an angel? Is it just some form that God has taken? Because the form God takes is supposed to be like Jesus, right? Like that's the one kind of actual, form, as far as like earthly form goes. But here it's a little bit different. That's that's the struggle, and I guess I would do somebody a disservice by insisting on one way or the other. I personally believe that he actually wrestled with this stranger, and this stranger was actually God personified, and just kind of that avatar and what he chose to do.
It's
But
just
yeah,
such an odd, like from a Western perspective, reading it, because
yeah,
I'm not used to rabbinical study and everything like that, obviously. But like, it seemed like such a random addition to the story, because it didn't flow with the rest of the narrative very well. And then also, God was losing the wrestling match until all of a sudden he whipped out his super secret technique of like, I'm gonna touch you and your hip dislocates. And
yeah.
like, because that's the way the story was telling it. Like, God was losing the wrestling match until he just like busted out his ninja moves or whatever. And it felt so like from a Western storytelling perspective, it's not satisfying at all. So it's like it leaves you wondering like what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the importance of this story, as well as its kind of mystery, neither of which can be understated. We get Jacob being called Israel from this story. We get
Right.
the name Israel from the story, which means he who struggles with God, right? Like, and so like this is an important moment that we still feel the effects of today, and I understand it seems a little dislocated from the story. Now, Jacob at this moment is about to go see his brother Esau again, who he stabbed in the back.
Right.
Last we saw. Esau thankfully receives Jacob well, and everything like that. But, what is Jacob doing? Jacob's kind of coming to grips with some of the crummy things that he's done, and this is kind of a wrestling with God moment, specifically he's trying to get the name of God, right? But this is and in my opinion, again, my reading, but this is my reading of it, is that he's asking the wrong question, which is why this keeps happening to him. So he's like, what's your name? Well, that's not the thing that lets you really know who God is, right?
Yeah.
Is God's name. And it's funny that we today struggle with the name of God. Theological scholars struggle with the actual name of God even after reading the Bible. There's several different references to him. Some have argued that like even Elohim like means like Satan, or is it God, or is it Jehovah? Like we struggle with what's God and what's not when we read through these things. But God is, the nature of God is what he needs to know and what he keeps failing to come to grips with. He's trying to get like a name and a mailing address as opposed to a spirit, right? Now Jacob does overcome this, right? Not that he gets the name of God, but actually he gets his own name at the end of this.
Right.
We're told that, and I think that that's important. What happens after wrestling with God? We don't contain God more. We don't figure out God more. We figure out ourselves more, right? He who loses his life shall find it, right? We submit to God, and then that's when we really find ourselves. It's this seeking of God, but in that seeking, what we're doing is we're not, it's like climbing a mountain. The mountain hasn't changed at all. What has changed is our perspective. our strength, our endurance, right? Like as we climb that mountain, it's still like, hey, we're climbing the mountain, we're trying to conquer the mountain, right? We're trying to struggle with God in this sense. But the real moral of it is that we climb it, we get to the top, and we figure out more about ourselves. In addition to, of course, what we learn about God. But what we learn about God is a lot of times God loves to flip it around on us, right? Like to know God, you're supposed to know your fellow man. To love another person is to see the face of God, right? This is what it is. And so, of course, this happens as he's coming to grips with seeing Esau again. He's struggling with God, but really he's struggling with Esau, with the man who he stabbed in the back, with the guy who he betrayed. And that's the struggle that we're really having. It's a lot easier to have this internal struggle, this one-on-one struggle with, Jacob's like, oh, I can go all night wrestling with God. But how often can we be in the presence of somebody who we betrayed and share a dinner with them? That's much tougher.
Well, and then the next story that I was curious about
Yeah.
is, you have Jacob and Esau's reuniting, and it goes extraordinarily well, and that's great. And then you expect that there's going to be an extended period of time where they're, getting to know one another again. But Jacob resettles like in this new town that is an area that Esau has control over. If I'm understanding that correctly, like Jacob is coming to terms with a new place, and it's in territory that Esau controls. Is that right?
That sounds right. Yeah. What's your
The
what's the question,
specific,
Brad?
this is Genesis 34,
Okay.
but it's about the story of the rape of Dinah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So again, with the storytelling that's not in a Western perspective at all,
Right.
so you have this situation where they're working in the fields and they're getting, I guess, themselves set up in this new place that they're unfamiliar with, but they're still, um, they're getting set up and everything, and they're all working the fields. And Dinah goes to town to visit, like some local women or whatever, and in the process comes like local boys, a local group of boys or whatever, take a shining to her, and one of them takes her in and rapes her.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, after the event, falls in love with her. And they go to try to get restitution with the family. Like, especially the dad catches the son basically, and is like, "What have you done?" And you would almost kind of think, I guess, from a Western storytelling perspective, that the father would kind of dismiss it as boys will be boys sort of thing. And
Right.
also, since the victim's family were foreigners, they could just, not only boys will be boys, but also sweep it under the rug because they have less institutional power there. But instead, the father takes like what had been done extraordinarily seriously and goes to Jacob and says, "I am so sorry for what my son has done." And the son genuinely apologizes as well and says, "I'm actually in love with your daughter. I'd really love to make this right." At least this is according to this. I mean, this is this perspective I came across it with. Like, it was horrible that what was done. And then Jacob says, "Yeah, absolutely, we can work this out." And they come up with the whole circumcision thing and everything like that. And then after they're all circumcised and they're all recovering from their wounds, because my goodness, I can't imagine doing that in the biblical times, as a fully grown man.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll get a moment with Moses later. It makes you go, oh, but yeah.
yeah. So they got every man in town to adjust to this new way of living from a foreigner that just came into town. Um, and then the boys go into town, like Jacob's sons go into town and kill everyone, kill
Yeah.
all the men, and then take the women and children into slavery or whatever, servitude.
Yeah.
and that sucks. Which Jacob is noticeably like he's distraught by, like he's like, I can't believe you did this. And then his sons are like, well, they raped our sister. What are you going to do? And then the story just ends. Like, oh, I mean, it doesn't end. It continues on in the next chapter where, like, uh, something else that I wanted to ask you about was God, like, casts upscaled fear over the town to make sure that nobody chased after them or whatever. Um, like he put terror on the whole town so that they wouldn't follow, so that Jacob's family could flee.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole story, that's wild.
Yeah. Oh, it's really sad. I mean, it's sad for everybody. Outside of, well, I guess it's still sad for them, but I don't feel too bad for like Shechem, obviously the rapist. His father Hamor is being like, okay, we don't necessarily get his apology so much, but he is trying to be like, hey, can my son like marry your daughter, right? Like, can we maybe marry and like settle in and everything like that? Because at the moment, like what we have here, so we have a custom, unfortunately, where intermarrying is frowned upon. We've noticed that with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They're even like, go marry your own family members because
Right.
I don't want you mating with these people, right? And Hamor correctly is like, there shouldn't be anything wrong with us like marrying. Now, one of the issues, I love Shakespeare. I a lot of people talk smack about Romeo and Juliet because Romeo and Juliet make bad decisions. But that's part of the point of the book. When you put people into these very oppressed, repressed situations, they make bad decisions. They make uninformed decisions. They're like, they don't grow up right. They don't know what they're doing, right? Like, so what happens is, like, for them to date, because they're not supposed to openly date, we get situations like this. Now, obviously, I'm not going to at all excuse rape. Always bad, is bad here in the Bible, right? Like, thankfully, this is a frowned upon thing that Shechem does. But I remember when I watched a documentary about Stonewall, and I remember I cried during several moments in the film, but in one of them, the guy was like, it was just so nice to have a place where I could like date instead of just like hook up for sex, like where I could just like talk with people and have like, a meaningful relationship with them, as opposed to like sneaking away for a few minutes, right? Like, it was like, that's how I wanted to practice like love, but I wasn't supposed to practice it normally, so I had to sneak away for sex. And it's easy to condemn these people. It's like, they're just like sexual perverse, they just want this. But they're kind of driven into that place, right? These are bad cultural circumstances. Again, no excuse for Shechem. The Bible's not making an excuse for Shechem. I am not either. I'm simply explaining like the problem that kind of Hamor sees, and the problem that God has with this situation, and a problem that Jacob is eager to rectify. Now, we should note that Jacob does not give his daughter to this man, this rapist here or whatever, because what he's going to try to do is fix this. He needs to fix the long-term undergoing problem. He doesn't even say, you can have, it should be noted, you can have Dinah as soon as you're all circumcised. He's like, hey, listen, all of you guys get circumcised first, and then we'll talk about our daughters and sons, dating first, right? So he's trying to kind of blend these cultures together and let it be okay. This should be a good moment. Unfortunately, what Jacob is trying to turn into a win, the two sons then turn into a loss by killing these people. God and Jacob quickly note that they are strangers in this land. They do not have the power over these people, and they will be, when they find out you just killed every male here and took a bunch of their women as slaves, you're in trouble, right? You're doomed. And this was not the right way to rectify the situation. I like this story because I think we can understand, I think modern day, we understand almost everybody in this story a little bit or know somebody who is like them. I
Mm.
completely understand why Simeon and Levi are like, no, I'm going to kill all these people, right? Like they raped my sister, right? But what they're doing is they're trying to make, mass murder and slavery a redemption for this. Whereas what really should have happened was this kind of cultural blending, something that we'll actually get later with Joseph in Egypt, until again, that goes south for other reasons that we will get to.
I'm
But
not sure how I even flashed in my head the comparison because they're not very comparable situations. But I was trying to think about the like what is a good justification or like what is a good comparison to murdering everyone in a town because of something that was wrong that was done to you. And the first thing that came to mind was Joel and Ellie in the situation with Joel killing all the fireflies. And that's not comparable because the fireflies actually were all individually responsible, whereas all the men in this town, is besides Seshem, were not responsible for what happened to Dina.
yeah, and there's likely a cultural issue here. As we've noted already, rape is unfortunately very common in the Bible and in this time period. Um, Whenever people say like, oh, morals don't get better, I'm like, listen, it used to be pretty commonplace to like be like rape your daughters and be like, that's my wife, and or like that's my duty as a father, that's my right, whatever. And thankfully we don't exist in those times anymore. Yeah, I have so much to say about the Joel and Ellie. I know you and I have debated about this before.
Yeah.
I am very against what the Fireflies were doing. As a pacifist, I don't like what Joel does either. Um, I I think the Fireflies. I think it's a good example because it makes you understand at least what Simeon and Levi are thinking, right? Like
Right.
a lot of people are like, oh, cool. So you're lying and you're going to end up killing this person, but you lied, because you don't want to look like the bad guys, and you're going to kill this person, for the greater good or something like that, because a vet told you that they think they can, coordinate this virus
A
differently.
vet. Yeah, it really was a vet, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I think in the remaster they even took it out of the game because it makes the Fireflies almost too perverse. But that note that you get that basically is like, yeah, we're not gonna succeed, and the doctors being like, this process doesn't even make sense, right? Like we are not actually going to be able to manufacture a cure for this. It's not even a virus; it's a fungal
Fungal
infection.
infection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for the fungal infection. And I think it was probably good that they took that out because that just makes them just bad, right? Like, but even then, like, is murdering all of them the way to go to save one innocent person? I like that the Bible explores stuff like this. I like that kind of we get a lot of answers about it. God helps them leave. See, unfortunately, God, all he can do is help them get out. Because there's really no rectifying it at this point, right? Trust is gone. Um, it's never going to get rectified with everybody.
Well, yeah, and that makes me the final part of the story that I kind of want to explore is we've talked about the human perspectives in this, but God made two major decisions over the course of this particular story. One is the obvious one, which is that he, you know, secured Jacob and his family's escape via like causing a wave of terror or whatever. The
Mhm.
Bible says that. But then also the less obvious one was God hasn't been in communion with Jacob all this time. He could have stopped this at any point by, letting Jacob know, hey, Dina's going to go into town today and she's going to get attacked. You need to stop it. Or your sons are about to scuttle the entire plan that you have rigged up to save relations here. You need to intervene with your sons, or any number of steps along the way he could have stepped in, but he didn't.
Yeah.
And like, what's the meaning there?
Yeah. God frequently allows bad things to happen so that we can learn from them going forward. The change the change that God wants, when we get to like the point of the New Testament, we clearly see, well, and it's in Isaiah and stuff too, but God wants us to be obedient, not because he's big and we're little, but because like we've learned these lessons and we're getting better. When we read the Old Testament law for, what is called the written code versus the New Testament, like spirit of the law, and we're supposed to get from one to the other. And the thing is if we don't learn this lesson now, we just don't learn this lesson. We have to learn it this way. Otherwise, it's, well, God warned us, and so, no issue, right? We need to have these failures so that we can have a concrete, like, look what happens when you try this. Again, we still wrestle with this, I think, because we don't take this lesson seriously enough. Like, God, it's arguable that God needs to let us have this lesson more often. But to be like, hey, listen, you just come in with violence in response to like an injustice against you, as opposed to trying to culturally fix the root of the problem, then the result is going to still be disastrous, and you maybe need to see that for yourselves. I think people in communion with God, even these people, need to see it for themselves. God could tell them, but then they're doing it because God commands or because God says it's a good idea, as opposed to, because they need to learn the lesson about fixing things culturally and making peace. That's the important lesson to learn.
I
Don't
guess
think they
the,
learn.
the question is well, because Jacob was trying to do that. What you just said of like having communion and peace with his neighbors and everything like that, and it was taken out of his hands by the results of his son's actions, not his actions. So
Yeah.
like Jacob didn't do anything wrong in that scenario. Like I honestly think Jacob, like for all of the stories in the past where Jacob screwed up and did horrible things, like this was not an example of that. Like
Yeah. This is not, the lesson is for me, the reader of the Bible, to learn, not for Jacob.
Gotcha.
And that sucks, but that is it. When we read about Lot, right? Like, or not, I'm sorry, not Lot. What am I talking about? Job. Sorry, I'm dumb. Different
Yeah.
3-letter name. Why did I say Lot? We read about Job. Like, Job is not a lesson for Job. Job doesn't get the answer from God ever in the Bible. That the lesson of Job is a lesson for me, Hody Johns, and not a lesson for Job. Right? Like, that's the person who's supposed to learn the lesson. So you're correct to identify that Jacob's not really learning or growing much from this situation. He tried to do the right thing, and his sons, and unfortunately, like, I don't want to, the Hivites obviously have a lot of issues as well. But kind of take that out of his hands when he's trying to navigate it well, and then it gets navigated badly because of the actions of other people. Jacob did try to do the right thing here. We can say Hamor, I don't know his objective. He could be like, hey, let's marry this so that it is swept under the rug. I don't know Hamor's exact actions here, but either way, like, the result could have been a lot better, and it was kind of heading that direction until it did go disastrous. But that lesson is not for them. That lesson's for all of us.
And then one final thing that I read this evening before we started.
Uh-huh.
Genesis 37. We have the birth of Joseph, the last son of Jacob, and the fact that I feel like Jacob should know better, because he's been in a line of people who constantly have their fathers favor a single sibling.
This is the fourth time in a row, right?
Fourth time in a row. And I wrote down in my notes, I'm like, what is it with these dads that exclusively love one child over the others? Because like I was thinking about it from my perspective, having two daughters. Do I love one of the daughters over the other? And the answer is no, I don't. I have an inherent biases right now because I can communicate with one and I can't communicate with the other because she's only one, so she's not really, you can't have a conversation with her. Whereas I can hold a conversation with my older one. But that doesn't mean I love them differently. It just means that like there are different stages of development, I couldn't grasp the idea of loving one of your children more than the others and more so like doing it 4 times in a row. Like each successive generation sees the destruction that's caused by one of them getting favored over the other, to the point where Jacob just had to literally reconcile with his brother over the fact that their father's love over one of them over the other broke their family apart.
Yeah.
And then he goes on and perpetuates it with his child.
Yeah. It's people who are abused, do they most often end the cycle or do they most often carry it forward? Like, it's unfortunate, but like, that's the tendency. And it should, your mentality is good. You should be the one that's like, boy, my dad favored my other brother more. That really sucked. I'm not going to do that with my kids. But instead, you just kind of institutionalize it as a way of life. And yeah, not good. Not good to favor one kid over the other, especially because we see now, and Joseph is the one unique case in which I don't want to say God chose him over the others, because we're going to see later that God does choose, Judah in various ways. And, sometimes get blessings, curses kind of mixed around a little bit. But where God seems to be like, hey, this is my dude right now, right? And that person and Jacob's actually lined up. In the past 3 before this, the father, the one that they wanted, was different than what ended up happening. I guess not so. I guess Isaac's a little, because they wanted that one over Ishmael eventually, or whatever. But God's, and even then God blesses Ishmael, right? Like, that's, I can't even say that, but like, God clearly does not have any respect for which one you loved. Even in the case of Joseph, he's like, cool, you love that one? Me too. And I'm going to make sure that his whole life he's ripped away from you and going somewhere else, right? Like, and growing up somewhere else. God's plan for it does not have any respect to the one that the Israelite custom of saying the Jew, and I don't want to say Jewish because this is not in Judaism. In fact, that's a big lesson from all these, is that we need to stop this, like this favoritism thing. Like, God has plans for people, and maybe it's the firstborn, maybe it's the secondborn, fourthborn, fifthborn, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, God doesn't really care about that. God cares about people's hearts, and that's what he goes on. And we tend to go on. I mean, this, racism's still a thing. Like, it's terrible, but even now they're kind of looking at like who's got the best genetics, right? Like, even with people like Leah and Rebecca, right? Like, the one was just kind of had better genes, and so their kids were supposed to be better because they looked better. They looked like they had better genes in them. And like, they haven't, of course, at this time period, don't have the science of genetics, but as we learn with the goats, they understand the general concept, of it. Very base understanding of it. And so they believe that this is what's going to translate into better people, right? You have the firstborn kid. You have them when you're younger. Oh, that's supposed to be the healthiest one. You had them when they're young and strong and vibrant, and they're going to be the best, And it's not until a lot later that we kind of find, at least scientifically, that it's stupid. But we get to find out right now that God believes that this is a stupid practice. Yeah. It's sad that Jacob again perpetuates this. You'd think it would end by now. It's coming up still, but there is some blessings in store for, like, not only some of these brothers, but actually some adopted children and grandchildren coming up. So that is something that I can't say Jacob's fully learned his lesson, but at least he's not like, all right, in order of my love from least to greatest of these people, which, like, how shall I dole out the blessings?
Yeah.
At least that doesn't happen. But yeah.
Well, I'm hoping Reuben gets some love from God because he's the only one that actually like looks out for his brother.
Oh,
yeah.
for not wanting to kill his brother, like, let's
Yeah.
sell him to slavery instead. Yeah.
Well, he was going to throw him in the cistern.
Oh, that's right. The
and then
slavery thing
rescue him
later.
from this.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And then rescue him from the cistern after what his brothers had left, and then
Uh-huh.
bring him back to his dad, and like they were going to kill this kid,
Yeah.
But then the slavers came along and kind of ruined that idea.
Yeah, and you're not this far, but in this week we have Judah when Joseph puts that cup in Benjamin's sack. You have Judah doing the "save him, take me" thing. So Judah has his moment of being like, "Hey, have mercy on our father Jacob, because he'll die if Benjamin doesn't show up. Take me instead." And that is a good moment. So um, even in Simeon and Levi, understandable. Levi is the one who goes on to be like the priestly faction of the Israelites. So like he's got his blessings. Um, Unfortunately, in the case of Reuben and Judah, I believe both of them jack it up. Um, and I hate that for you, because I know I am with you at this moment that I'm rooting for Reuben and Judah. We don't have a lot of reason to dislike them, but unfortunately, I believe there's some. We're not done with the gross parts of Genesis yet.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. So that's coming up. I did have a few from the New Testament that I wanted to go over. I talked about it. I posted them just because I found them fascinating, but I thought this prayer by Jesus was interesting, and I'll just read it real quick. It says, "O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, thank you for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased you to do it this way. My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father. No one truly knows the Father except the Son, and those whom the Son chooses to reveal him." I think it's interesting that Jesus is not only like he's in a prayer, and he is talking about what a great idea it is to bestow the knowledge of God for the people that are kind of self-admittedly novices, young students, children, and actively hiding that from people who consider themselves wise and clever. And it's this condemnation of being self-wise that I really love a lot, because I have found I was a very self-wise person when I was a conservative. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I was very intelligent and informed and knew everything, and was able to do this. And when I finally was like, man, I'm having trouble reconciling these verses, it was when I told myself, maybe I don't know, that I gained the most knowledge about the Bible. That my acceleration in education went from 1 to 100. I mean, I'm literally probably like 100 times accelerated the path. And I even mean academically. I even mean like from an academic perspective. As I'm reading the Bible, as I'm reading it with my conservative bent, I'm just constantly thinking, how do I twist this? How do I frame this? How do I think this? And when I just sit there and read it, like a child, just being like, just read me a story, right? Like I'm just gonna sit down like I'm watching a movie, right? That's when all the wisdom of the Bible came gushing into me. I think this is very true on a deeply spiritual level, and it's hard for me to explain. As Jesus said here, it's just the way of God, right? I would like to think there are some self-wise people who are also wise, right? Like who are also just very smart people. And I also like to think there are some non-childlike people who are very like, hey, I can handle, more information and incorporated that. But that's just not the way of God, right? He's already emphasized like you're not getting to heaven unless you come with a childlike heart. And again, here, you're not going to get the wisdom of God unless you're childlike. We've read verses already that talk about it, rejoicing in simplicity. And, I'm not saying that I want the Bible to be exclusively for the stupid, but I think those who come in with that blank canvas end up getting the most out of the Bible. One of the things is we're going through the Bible, I'm finding a lot of the best questions and insights in our group are coming from people who are like, this is my first time reading this. That part struck me. As opposed to being like, oh yes, this is my 53rd time through this book. Check out this little language dialectic and da-da-da. And I like that too, right? Like I like that as well. It's good. I'm not trying to put down the people in our Bible, our Bible study who are like that, or the Love First Christians who are like that. But I find that like the maximum insight I get from the scriptures is when I take a step back and watch and let it speak versus when I try to be self-wise. Sure. I imagine some of this makes sense to you.
Yeah, no. But I was kind of curious what the word choice that you made, where you said like you use the word stupid, and I even
Yeah.
charitably, um, because I immediately in my head translated that to ignorant rather than stupid, because I felt like that was more along the spirit with what you were saying. But I interpreted that as humility, not necessarily ignorance, or even because when you're talking about like the self-wise aspect and how you overcame that and you learned so much faster, I'm picturing you like tumbling down the Dunning-Kruger slope into
Yes.
like
Yes.
like to the point where you realize that you don't really know all that much and you have so much more to learn, and then you can get so much more value out of the Bible. Whereas if you already feel like you know everything, why would you even bother to read the Bible? You could, talk about 2 Corinthians and bluster on about how much you know everything. uh,
Yes.
yeah. um,
I know the most about this. I
what's your
remember there.
favorite Bible verse, Mr. Trump? Oh, all of them,
Terrible.
everything. It's
Right.
wonderful.
I've been endorsed by people who love the Bible, right? Like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started. Yeah. Yeah, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect is appropriate. For those who are listening, and there are many of you right now. Hello everybody. What is the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Oh, yeah. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a large slope. I'm going to do it from this side. So it's the x and y axis is x-axis is the amount of confidence that you have in what you're saying, and the y-axis is the actual amount of knowledge that you have. And the slope goes up really, really sharp at first and peters off right at the very beginning. And that's where a lot of people stop, is they learn a cursory amount of knowledge, they decide that they know everything and that there's nothing left to learn, and they lord over that small amount of knowledge that they have over some people who don't have any knowledge at all, and parade around like peacocks, like they own the place. And you get over that small little hump and you go way down, because as you learn a little bit more, you find out there's so much more to learn about this topic. And your confidence and you're learning more, but your confidence in how much you know craters,
Yeah.
because you realize that you have so much more to learn. And then the slope evens out, so you end up with on a plateau where you've learned a whole lot about the subject, but you recognize like you never get back to that initial confidence level. The confidence level when you knew only a little bit is way more than the confidence level when you know a lot on the subject, because you always learn that there's more to learn.
Yeah. And I find that mine is still plummeting. Um and maybe that goes a lot to say about where I am in my faith journey. But one of the issues that I had is I wanted to, I general studies religion. I wanted to know everything about all the religions, right? And then I had this realization that I could sit down today, start reading religious texts, and I would die before I finished reading all the religious texts. And so, right off the bat, I had to say, sorry, these religious texts, I'm just never going to get to you, right? Like, and I want to know everything about religion. That was my goal, right? Like, I was this righteous hotshot. I wanted to be like, yeah, I want to be able to be like, oh yeah, that religion studied it like you wouldn't even believe, right? Like know more than you do, and you're a practicer of that religion, right? And
Zoroastrianism, I've got it down.
totally, right? Yeah. Still by the way, more popular than you would think. For those who look at like the most popular religions of the world, always cracks the top 10, and people are like, what? And so there's just certain like faiths that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna get to this. Like, okay. So right off the bat, like huge blow to my ego, because I'm just like, hey, there's some religions that I'm just not going to be able to comment on because I'm never going to get to read it. I'm never going to get there. Right. And then now here's the further problem. Even the ones that I do get to read, okay, if I just spend my time learning like about all of them for the rest of my life, I'll still be no better off. I'll just have read the text, right? Like that's it.
Right. You'll have a surface level knowledge of everything without having any sort of deep knowledge of anything.
Correct.
Yeah.
So then if I'm actually going to study something, thing, as opposed to just say I technically read the words, that's another whole bunch of religious texts that I'm never going to get to, right? Every time I go through the Bible again, that's me saying, I have read the Mahabharata, right? But like something like that, to be like, I'm sorry, I'm never going to get to you, right? Like the Library of the Buddha is probably the best example. I'm never going to get there, right? I am going to get to some of them, and I am going to trust that a lot of yogis have, and scholars have picked like, hey, here's a story from the Library of the Buddha. You're going to love this story. Okay, cool. But here's the thing. By me admitting that, I already say, somebody else who studied it, I'm going to have to borrow from your expertise. I am already placing myself under their expertise, right? By saying that. Mm-hmm. And this becomes so incredibly true as we just focus on the Bible. I learned from people who spent their entire careers and I'm talking like 40 plus years, doing archaeological and anthropological work in Israel. But not just that, studying the years between 600 and 400 BC. But not just that, only the area west of the Jordan River. But not just that, those who and then there's like a team of these like 4 people who are like sharing this information about that particular area from the west side of the Jordan River, north of, the Nile and south of Syria. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
These people, and they are so aware that they have elected to do something so specific that they've had to forego everything else. Right? Like as soon as I start talking about Alexander the Great's invasion after the year 400 BC, they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. They throw up that they had to dedicate themselves to some point. So I get stuck in this place where I say, cool. So now I'm in a place where I will two things are true. First, I'm not going to know everything that I want to know, that I should know. I'm not even going to cursory read over it. It's impossible. And second, I'm never going to be as much of an expert as I want to be about any one particular subject, because I've dedicated myself to general religious studies. And these people are over here that have emphasized like one specific minute thing and analyzed the heck out of it. And so I am not as intelligent as either of those two things, right? Like, and so now I find myself where I go, okay, so at some point I have to throw my hands up and just trust somebody. I remember I got back into town, and I remember going back to my old church after, I'd moved around a little bit. I went to college and everything like that. And I remember being like, oh, I just graduated with this. I've got a degree in theology now. And this one girl asked me this question, because she, no education, but asked me this question that was way above my head. And they were like, oh, that's just, I only ask you this because that's what we're doing in Bible study this week. And I remember just being like, what was it all for? The more I learn, the more dumb I realize I am, right? Like just living your life. There's another bit. I think it was in the reading last week. I think it might've been last week, but I don't think we brought it up on the stream, where Jesus said, where do we get knowledge? No, it's Proverbs. Where do you get knowledge? Go to the marketplace, talk to people, right? Like you want to learn the will of God, talk to people, like go out there and just live it. Right. And this knowledge that's affirmed in both the Old and the New Testament, that if I really want to become a master, I will first have to acknowledge that I'm an idiot, a child, a servant, stupid, whatever you want to say. And that's when the knowledge begins, to kind of say like, cool, there's no way I can possibly know it all. I can't walk in with this confidence and being like, oh yeah, let me tell you all about Mesopotamia and 2000. No, I had to outsource every single aspect of my knowledge, right? Like until I choose to write a thesis, nothing that I'm talking about is unique to me. I'm trusting a lot of different people and a lot of different readings. And more importantly, I'm trusting the Holy Spirit as I guide through this, because a lot of these people conflict. Yeah, surprise, surprise. There's a lot of Christian denominations that don't exactly see eye to eye on a lot of subjects, and I just have to trust them. That's and let the Holy Spirit kind of tell me what they do. And of course, the the good fruit on the good tree, bad fruit from the bad seed.
Well, yeah, I was going to get. You mentioned that one of the other things that you read was that the good fruit, good tree passage gets brought up again, and you also quoted something else on the 18th in the Discord. You had quoted another passage. Do not withhold good.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it? Your quote?
Yeah.
Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. If you can help your neighbor now, don't say, come back tomorrow, then I'll help you. Don't plot harm against your neighbor, for those who live nearby you trust you. Don't pick a fight without reason when no one has done you harm.
Yeah.
It's a good, solid passage.
Yeah, it's and yeah, that's the second time that Jesus actually brings up the good fruit comes from a good tree. Like, these people come to you and they want to see your fruits, right? You don't say like, oh, they would have had fruit if they only came by tomorrow, but right now we just can't have it. This really kind of hit the immigration thing close to home for me, as well as like you see a lot of nationalists that talk about like wood chippers, but then they put them away when it's their people who would go in the wood chippers, and they know they shouldn't support it, right? But they just say like, hey, listen, maybe we got to do the bad thing today so that tomorrow things are a little bit better. But
everyone's a pedophile except for the people that are actually pedophiles.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Everybody's a groomer until you groom somebody, and then then you're just a pastor apparently. And
yeah, you're just a pastor.
You're just Catholic, right? That's all there is to it. It's terrible. It's terrible. So yeah, we talk about, and Jesus is using this example to talk about the Pharisees who are obeying the written code, but you can tell by their works that they're not believers, right? It's not a matter of how obedient they are. We actually have examples of incredibly disobedient people, in the scriptures being used for God's will that do a better job submitting to God than those who like never broke a rule, right? We talked about this when we went over Romans, that Paul explicitly talks about how you can have a lawless spirit and obey all the written code. Or do you best you can, because another thing pointed out in Romans is that the written code contradicts itself at various points, and so adhering to it is stupid, but you could adhere to it as much as you could, and you would still be a very lawless person at heart, versus somebody who is a sinner, a mistake maker, but their fruits are amazing, and that's really the example that we need to be going to. Any thoughts? You talked about it, but any other thoughts that you had about that passage? It's very simple. Just loving your neighbor right now as opposed to tomorrow. But I find that there's like a lot of political implications. A lot of people are like willing to swallow a lot of bad stuff in the hopes that maybe like some kind of long-term goal is bad, and long-term goal is good. Right. But that's not how it works. The ends are the means in Christianity. So.
No, there was another quote that you had that I puzzled over a bit more. That I didn't really fully understand the takeaway that you got from it, which was the one you posted yesterday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, every teacher of religious law who becomes a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a homeowner who brings from his storeroom new gems of truth as well as old. And you'd commented, we're so often bored in church, but this should be the opposite of what's happening. Teachers are explicitly instructed to take bits of old truth and bits of new truths we discover today. And I guess I didn't really fully, I didn't really understand the comment that Jesus made, and I didn't really understand the extrapolation that you took from it. So if you'd elaborate on that.
Yeah. So this is specifically given to teachers of religious law. And it's supposed to be when you go into church, if they're a disciple of the kingdom of heaven, they're like a homeowner who goes to their storeroom. Now, what's in the storeroom? When we talk about new gems of truth as well as the old, like he talks about, they go into their storeroom. They're going to bring out family heirlooms that they've had for centuries, right? To be like, oh, check this out. This is my grandfather's thing, whatever. I'm bringing this out. China, right? Let's say that.
Yeah.
Right. But they're also bringing out the new. What's the new? Oh, it's food, right? That's what we're keeping in the storeroom a lot. In addition to the dishes, we also have food, right, for you to eat. And so it's supposed to be a situation where this combination of the new and the old come together. Now, I find that this verse challenges a lot of Christians, because anytime I talk about new truths or old truths, Christians are like, no, that's not such a thing. It's just the truth. Well, Jesus is specifically talking about new gems of truth here. This is very in conjunction with the Bible, where we talk about learning new things as we go, right? Like, these peoples aren't ready for God's doctrine about not divorcing your wife for no reason yet, right? So they get this doctrine where they're allowed to be like, I'm done with my wife, I'm just kicking her to the curb, right? Because they're bad people. Jesus says, I gave you that because your hearts weren't ready for like the truth yet, right? This is the actual truth. You're not supposed to just leave your wife destitute just because you met somebody young and hot, right? That's stupid. We're not doing that anymore. So that comes off as a new truth, right? Now, we can talk about the spirit of the law and how that's always been there, right? Like, nobody's reading the Bible and just being like, cool, I'm going to go get a divorce because I found somebody hotter, right? Like, that spirit is always there, but they do have this like exception for it in the old that we kind of got to get rid of and then make room for the new law. A great example of this is, I think, the anti-science like Christians. When we find out some truth about the universe, they're a lot of times so eager to like toss this out as though it will undo Christianity. Let me give you a great example that I had. Everybody my age that was deep in theology will probably remember this, but there was like a month where they actually, and if you type smoking gun Big Bang theory, you will find that they talk about this. What was that smoking gun? Well, they found, as you know, satellite images and everything came in, they found this push happening in the universe, right? Like, there is an accelerated, I'm going to try to describe it as well as I can, but basically a bell-shaped cone, right? That would happen if there were an explosion. And if you think of an explosion pushing things forward, now in space, there's nothing to act against it, right? So everything's getting pushed at the same rate because everything, equal and opposite reaction, but there's no opposites here, right? No, that's the wrong one. Object in motion stays in motion. There you go. Nothing pushing against it, so they're staying in motion. And so for a month, it was like Big Bang confirmed, right? And me as a Christian, I was just like, all right, I guess Big Bang confirmed, right? About a month later, this very same discovery ended up negating the Big Bang theory. Why is this? A Big Bang theory is a singularity of mass, right? That results in an explosion that sends the universe out, right? The problem is we did indeed find that this wave is happening, but we found some objects that were celestial bodies that were, while they were reacting to that push, they were not reacting at the same rates. And some were even working against this motion. Now, they were still reacting to the motion, similar to like if you throw like a very light tennis ball up in the air on a windy day, right, in front of you, it still is going to end up behind you. But, that there is something that's going in front. Well, if there's something that's reacting like that, that means it's not part of the singularity, right? And so therefore it was not a singular bang. It was not a singular event that happened. This motion exists without all the celestial bodies being a part of it, right? So Christianity goes from being overturned to like confirmed, but I don't like either of those ways of saying it, within like a month. But the thing is, if the Christians who rejected that right off the bat made it so that they were not able to accept that second truth right off the bat either, right? Because what they did is they said, nope, I don't believe it. I won't believe it. Scientists are just making everything up. There's no celestial push. All these images are fake. All science is not real, and it's government and politicians trying to control your mind, and I don't believe it. Because that was the Christian response, they didn't then get to be like, hey, look, this science actually confirms the opposite of the Big Bang, that there is a singularity of mass, right? Like that exploded. And so because they never got to see science kind of be on their side because they rejected it outright, it's okay to accept new truths, right? Like, just in a very real sense, like new things that we find. It's okay to accept genetics. It's okay to accept physics and new things that we discover in those fields, that Christians should be the first ones accepting that, but then also bringing out their old gems and being like, cool, how do these sit side by side?
Hmm.
We've talked about genetics already. Hey, how does this story of the goats and the stripes fit with what we now know about genetics? Well, it turns out they actually fit rather well, don't they?
Sure.
Right? Like that actually fits really well. So it's a cool thing to see this old and the new come together. Right. And similarly, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, when we look at things like the widening of God's mercy, we understand the nature of homosexuality, right? We know that it's not, I'm going to use homosexuality specifically. Bible or Romans 1 condemns forfeiting your natural relations for unnatural ones. Well, then the truth, when we discover it, that this is in their nature, that is their natural desire, right? That it would be against the spirit of Romans 1 then to say that they forfeited, to want them to forfeit their natural desire for one that is not in their nature. So we embrace that truth and just say, cool, homosexuals are covered, right? It's similar to the Bible where you talk about how it's a sin to blind yourself, but it's not a sin to be blind, right? Like, I mean, that's foolish, right? So we read this, and when we understand that homosexuality is natural to people, we can look at Romans 1 and then just be like, cool, I accept that truth. And oh, hey, look how it fits with the old truth. This makes a lot of sense now. What Christians don't want to do is they have what they interpret as the old truth being, which was wrong. Their view on it was incorrect. And so then they also don't bring out this new truth. And so they have none of the truth instead of both pieces. That's kind of what I take away from it. I hope that clears up any confusion.
Yeah, it does. And I feel like every single week I'm coming to you with a new YouTube video that I just recently watched that covers a very solid like aspect of our conversation here.
Yeah.
But we're talking about you were specifically mentioning new scientific developments and how Christians at the time incorporated them into their dogma.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a video that I just recently watched by Folding Ideas. I just posted it in the Discord. It's
Perfect.
called Man Tracks, a true story of fake fossils. And a significant portion of the story, it's a pretty interesting story about how fossils were fabricated, specifically footprints, like footprints of both dinosaurs and like Bigfoot and things like that are faked over time, and how how those fake prints actually led to scientists discovering real prints. And
Cool.
like but there's a significant aspect of the story that it focuses on, where there was a long time where a Christian scholar whose name I've forgotten off the top of my head, but he was super invested in the idea that man and dinosaurs lived at the same time period. And so he got heavily involved in the process of searching for tracks, because he was trying to prove his theory as a pastor that humans and dinosaurs coexisted like they explicitly said in the Bible. And it got to the point where it got so invested, like he got so invested into it, and he put so much effort into it, and obviously technology had advanced to the point where they could disprove it as easily, because this was back in the 60s, I think. That his methodology, like his findings and everything like that he accumulated, got so popular that they were put into text, like school curriculum. Like students were learning about his what we now know to be false beliefs in schools, as a result of him being so zealous about it. Which is, I mean, it was a fascinating little story.
You know, a lot of I think this is why we need to be open to what the truth is. Bible says, I rejoice in those of you who walk in the truth, right? When Paul writes his letters, you know, that you focus on what's true and let that guide your faith, as opposed to trying to make your faith guide the truth. if your faith is true, there is no conflict, right? There's no issue there. And if you find something that you think conflicts, and this is, again, going back to where me becoming the student learned more, I kind of go, okay, let's say I'm wrong about that. Now show me. Me being wrong about homosexuality blocked me from information that goes way beyond homosexuality. It changed my entire reading of the scriptures when I finally was like, okay, maybe I messed this up. Let's learn it this other way. Let's learn it let's see what's true and then go from there. Yeah, it's I like this. I will watch it. I didn't get a chance to watch it, the other video that you linked. But I did want to discuss that probably next time, the Dark Enchantment video.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I'll be sure to view that. Let's any Bible stuff you want to get to current events?
Yeah, let's do current events.
All right.
I got about a half hour. I can't make it till the 9 o'clock. I have to cut it off 15 minutes early so I can get the
totally fine. Totally fine. I mean, obviously the big one's the Trump inauguration, right?
Yeah.
Like that's Aaron, your thoughts about that?
I mean, it went about as smoothly as it could. There was no major upsets, which, it frustrates me that Democrats simultaneously get no credit from Republicans for the fact that they are so civility pilled that they go along with things even when we're inaugurating a fascist. But also that Republicans will never get them credit for it. They constantly act like every step of the way they had to be drug kicking, and like the Democrats had to be drug kicking and screaming into the thing. And also that they'll excuse, things like Jan 6th. I found the January 6th pardon specifically to be fascinating because we were told over and over again by Trump, every single time it was brought up to him, he kept mentioning the fact that, not every Jan 6 person was the same. Some of them were literally just walking through the Capitol after the Capitol to be clear, the Capitol had been broken into. Like it wasn't a peaceful affair at any point.
Correct.
But a lot of people literally just walked in after the fact. Like they weren't involved in the breaking in. They weren't involved with the cop fighting. They literally just walked in, and then they got arrested after the fact. And that's, I could see how some of those people didn't deserve to be penalized and that they didn't deserve to be locked up for literally 4 years now. On the other hand, there were people there with swastika t-shirts. There were people there with zip ties to kidnap congressmen. There were people there chanting "Hang Mike Pence." Like there were a lot of people there who, beat up cops. Like as much as never mind. I won't go there. But they beat up cops. And all of them just got pardoned. Like Trump had made this big old hullabaloo on the campaign trail, and even as recently as before he was inaugurated, after he'd already been elected, that not all January 6th people were the same. And he constantly brought up the peaceful people who were just walking around. And then when he goes to actually had to issue his pardons, he just issues a blank pardon for all of them. I don't know. It's
if you are going to talk about how Joe Biden promised not to pardon his son, and that promise was broken, there's absolutely no reason to stay silent now when Trump promised he wouldn't pardon the people who were violent and then just issues the blanket one. That was a bit shocking. I really thought that would have been like a compromise, like fair. Like it just would have been fair. Like people would have just been like, that seems, yes, the violent people belong in prison. The people who are just there, maybe we're there for too long or something.
Yeah, four years is plenty enough time for just literally walking around the Capitol.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking about the people who, like, they're hours after the actual like bursting in took place, and they're just like sauntering around the the public area of the Capitol. It's
Right.
not that big of a deal. But the people that were bursting into people's offices, taking dumps on on like Nancy Pelosi's desk or whatever,
Right.
like all of those people, yeah, they probably deserve to be in prison.
Right. Yeah, there's a difference. And I mean, this is something, I mean, Republicans, Democrats, listen, like the Republicans in the White House, that was freaky. Of course, the right wing, and I guess correctly, will point out that several left wing movements have done this for their state and local offices, right? Like, this is, do we want to see these people punished into oblivion? You know how I feel about peaceful protest, obviously, Aaron. You know how I feel
Yeah.
about protest in general, right? But at the same time, I am aware that from a legal standpoint, you need to be able to protest tyranny in your country, right? Like, it happens, and we need to be able to have a voice and do something against it. I don't want that to look like violence. I also don't want that to be like, hey, like, that's tyranny. You guys faked the election, when there is no, what, when your source, when Trump's sources are like some random account on Instagram, right? Like that he's like, well, we saw this happen. It's like, right, from a parody account and no confirmation. It's like, well, I know it happened, right? Like, that's not it. Certifying fake electors, like,
Or
obviously
JD
this is,
Vance with the, we'll just make up stories until we get to where we want to be.
yeah,
Uh,
makeup, yeah.
but you mentioned it briefly. Biden's 11th hour pardons. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I saw so many Democrats or liberal friends. I shouldn't even say they weren't even Democrats per se, but liberal friends like excusing that. I don't understand why we have a pardoning system at all. Like, I've heard the justifications for why presidential pardons should exist. I don't understand like the morality behind it at all. I understand the political implications of it, like
Yep.
the fact that it's very politically efficacious for presidents to throw pardons around for political favors. Um, I don't understand the moral justification for it in any way.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
it creates a caste system where some people are above the law and some people aren't. And your ability to be above the law is your proximity to any one given president or
yeah,
governor or whatever for state crimes or all that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. It I want to see more people out of prison. I think a lot of these pardons, Ross Ulbricht, for example, is not somebody I want in prison, right? Like, the one that Biden did, Leonard Peltier. I looked into his situation, and uh I assume there's more details about that situation that I don't know about, but I guess he is one that, like, libertarians were kind of like, yeah, he needs to be out. And there, things, and that's one that Biden pardoned. So one from each of them there. Like, and I do think that there is, and I would rather any tool that lets there be less criminality seems like it should be good. Unfortunately, it's been used politically, I mean, over and over. Those my age will remember when Clinton was like, anybody willing to lie on my behalf, like, you're going to get your pardon, right? Like, I am in trouble right now. So just lie. It's fine. Admit to lying. In fact, the sooner you admit to lying after doing your testimony, the better, because then I can get you that pardon that you need right off the bat, and then you've got, um, how that has escalated to today, which is, as you mentioned, like, even with the people kind of stunned that Biden would do it, don't you know Trump is going to do this too? Like,
Mm.
if he's issuing blanket pardons both now and in the future, like both in the past and the future, for like Fauci and his son, do you really not think Trump is going to do that for his sycophants, right? Like, do you really think that Trump is just going to be like, oh, this is a guy who wants you to lie on his behalf? We read the Miller report, like the pressure that he's willing to put on people to lead them off the trail, to make sure that they don't find out what he's really up to. And like, if you're able to just lie and Trump will just pardon you blanket style, all right, like, sure, of course he's going to do that. Fake
Yeah.
electors, yeah, there's no chance of prosecuting them anymore, right? Like, it's bad the way politicians use it. Now, occasionally it'll hit like our way, but it takes like, it feels like pulling teeth and moving mountains in order to get like an innocent person to get pardoned.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody who's like legitimately like kind of scummy, you're kind of like, okay, well now they're getting a pardon, right? And you're just like, man.
It makes you really wonder, like, had Epstein not killed himself,
Right.
would he have been pardoned? You
Yeah.
know, like, or Ghislaine Maxwell, will she be pardoned by Trump? Um, yeah,
It's possible. I mean, if this stuff, so one of the things from the Joe Biden laptop story is that we found, I believe Joe Biden did not plan on pardoning his son, but then we saw that he was in these chats using the anonymous, fake emails that he was using, kind of, or I don't want to say facilitating, his son was doing that, but certainly overlording the process, right? Of like watching over blatant embezzling, bribery, stuff like that. And so obviously when it turned out that this was about to turn into an investigation into himself, he's like, okay, like pardons, and now you can't even look into it anymore, right? Like we're
right,
not even as soon as it's like that. So as soon as Trump's like, they're gonna find out that I even like, I mean, we already know he's on the flight log, so that's beside the point. But as soon as they find out like I went there after knowing he was convicted, whatever it may be, it's like, okay, as soon as this even comes up, yep, blanket pardon, can't even look into it anymore, and
right.
it's my son actually. So I do not indoctrinate my kids. I let them think what they think. I have a son whom I love, who is very like, I don't want to say very, he's like oddly conservative certain moments. Like he thinks drugs should like still be like criminalized. He's not like a big Trumper or anything, but like, he's still kind of in that phase where it's like letting people make bad mistakes is not good, right? Like and I of course tell him what I think, but I'm going to let him work through this himself. But he actually, with like the Ross Ulbricht pardon, he was like, but why? He's literally declared a war in these same executive orders, like against the things that Ross Ulbricht was doing. Like he's designated them as terrorists.
Yeah.
And now he's letting the one out of prison? Like that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense from a political consistency standpoint,
Of
which
course.
has never been what Trump stands for.
Of
Trump
course.
is follows his own ideology, Trumpism.
Right. He pardoned Ross William Albright, according to him, because the people were the same people that went after him. Well, if that was true, he'd be pardoning like thousands of people, right? Like if it's just the fact that the FBI went after me too, right? Like there's thousands of people in prison because of the FBI, right? like
Right.
that. Obviously, that wasn't the real reason. The real reason is because, of course, he wants to continue to prosecute these drug crimes and to get the people who would call him out the most to clam up. He sets one guy free. It's, of course, a deal he will make any day of the week, right? Like this is a smart, politically savvy deal. You let one guy go, and in order for those people who would call you out for your tyranny, to shut
look
up,
the other way.
right?
Yeah.
And then they shut up, and then you can go ahead and accelerate the drug war to the next level, right? Like, so it's politically savvy for him. That's for sure. I am happy to see Ross free. Like I said, I think the deal is bad. I don't want to shut up about the thousands and millions of innocent people who will now be victimized or who are targets now because of this. But that's the deal. So I guess that's what happened. Yeah. The pardons don't make a lot of sense anymore. I think they made a lot more sense when, if you pardon somebody who's really evil, you could get like shot in the head. But I think we're kind of not in a place in America where shooting people in the head works anymore, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean,
Unfortunately, they miss.
Fortunate or unfortunate, one way or another. I guess. I mean, you could try it, but like, the level of martyrdom that might happen because of this may not make it worth it. I think that they think they're just untouchable. At least, even if they're touchable and that you can like have an assassin graze their ear or even kill them, that this ideology will only be emboldened and empowered. And so it's kind of the pardon system made sense when there was like a lot more accountability from people.
Mm.
Here's a good example. If you raise the price of gas in France by 0.25% tax, there's going to be problems, right? You will be in a lot of trouble. If you do that here in America, that doesn't even
That's
top like
Tuesday.
the list, right? Yeah, that's average, right? Like Trump just signed going into place February 1st, 25% tariff on all products from Canada and Mexico. No, and we're not doing anything, right? Like I feel like that story, a lot of people don't even know that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like people don't even know. I mean, they kind of
And
heard that it's great.
if you told them that would, most people wouldn't care. Like they would just, not only they did not know, but like they wouldn't even. I don't feel like people externalize the idea of tariffs to increase prices,
Yeah.
which they specifically voted Trump in to decrease prices, but they're not going to internalize that he's raising prices. It's just going
Yeah.
to go over their heads.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it'll just, yeah, to them, they like it's just a big complicated system. And that's like, listen, there's some stuff that like Americans do better. I don't want to make it sound like French people are so smart. I mean, obviously they've got serious corruption issues with their political leaders as well. It's just different, Britain and like what they tolerate for their healthcare system. They will not tolerate some things that we just swallow up, and then they will just completely swallow up things that we just think are unconscionable, right? Like if you
Mm.
try to leave the country to get a surgery, the bulk of Britons oppose you being able to do that, right? Like they are against that happening. They will keep you in the country. There was this show, I forget the name of it, but like this person had basically warts eating their body, right? Like their whole leg was getting covered and it was growing and expanding. And the people were like, and the show was in Britain, and they were like, the way they said it, they're like, I'm not legally allowed to tell you that this is easily treatable in Spain. So maybe consider resting it, right? Like, like kind of one of those like wink, get your ass out of here, go to Spain, right? So Britons will tolerate that. But as soon as you try to even joke about like or whisper about putting something like uh what's the thing for anaphylactic shock, the needles, the
EpiPen?
EpiPens, yeah. As soon as you even joke about making EpiPens like a government healthcare issue, like, no, absolutely not. That's a market thing. You can have that on the shelves right next to the deodorant for about the cost of the same cost as a stick of deodorant. Like, and we're over here, like our EpiPens are like 200, 300 plus dollars, right? Because we're stupid, right? It may even be higher than that now. I feel like I'm even lowballing it, but like, we just tolerate different things, right?
Well,
And
I'm
so,
reminded of that. I think it was a kid in Britain. There was like a major story about 10 years ago or something like that, right? Where there was this kid in Britain that had some sort of treatment that they needed to stay alive. And um, there was a major scandal about the kid leaving the country to go
mhm,
take care of it elsewhere. Do you know what I'm
yeah,
talking about? Are you
I do.
like,
Yeah, it was that infant child. Yeah,
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 I can't remember the specifics of it, but I just remember that was a major scandal about a decade ago.
yeah. Um, I don't remember the name of it either, but yeah, it was one of those where it's like the government will fight for you to not be able to seek alternative care. It's a ridiculous thing. It is corrupt as all get out. It's bureaucratic as all get out. It is very wrong. But I just bring this up because it's like different peoples have different tolerances, right? Like Americans and trying to take our guns is obviously a different tolerance than it is in Japan. Like it's
Right.
just that's just how peoples be and how customs are different. We're all people. We're not different. We're just, cultures and stuff shape us so that we're willing to accept some things more than others. And this is the pardon system is one of those things. Unfortunately, it feels like this would have been completely unacceptable. I want to say like 30 years ago, but now it's, you know,
It's Tuesday.
just, yeah, it's Tuesday. It's just Tuesday. Um, there's a lot of stories that I could get into about immigration. I've mentioned this and I will continue to mention this, hundreds literally of Bible verses commanding you to love immigrants. And not just like the least of us, but like actual immigrants. Like you are called and commanded to do it. The bulk of Trump's executive orders had to deal with immigrants. To let you know how serious about it, in his inauguration speech, he hyped up his response to the COVID crisis and how well he handled that, and was like, that's how I'm going to handle this new crisis, immigration, right? Because the current, the current regime doesn't understand how to handle
the invasion at the border.
The invasion at the border, and I'm going to treat them like invaders. So, obviously, it's anti-Christian. I've gone into that. I've brought up verses. It just is anti-Christian. There's no other way around that. One of the issues that I have with executive orders in general that are like this is there's one that's unconstitutional, right? He's trying to end birthright citizenship. He signs it. Now, signed stuff doesn't make it a law, right? It's simply a command from the commander-in-chief that does carry some weight. Many of these things happen, as we noticed, the pardons happen with these executive orders, and so there are things that happen. But you'll know, like Obama was like, oh, no more Guantanamo Bay. And it's like, okay, that's not how that works. You have to close down Guantanamo Bay like with a legal system. The issue is while Trump can't end birthright citizenship, here's what this does. This does enable people to say, I have two conflicting orders here. I'm going to go with one of them, probably Trump's, and then I know that I'm protected, because until the courts actually strike it down, you are protected, right? Because you can say I was following this executive order, and that's the establishment. We learned about this when the courts declared the COVID lockdowns unconstitutional. It was obviously unconstitutional, but there was no recourse for that time in between. All that happened was at the time of that ruling, they said, oh, okay, so now we have to open back up because that was unconstitutional, right? So what we have here is when he says no birthright citizenship, places can deny birthright citizenship right now, even though not just law, but Constitution explicitly allows for birthright citizenship. But now what you can do is just say no until the courts actually reaffirm the Constitution. And of course, with the way the Supreme Court is, a lot of people wonders if they will reaffirm the Constitution.
Even though it's explicitly in the Constitution.
Even though it is very explicit. Well, I mean, our Second Amendment rights narrowly won, like this is like 15 years ago, but won 5-4 on you being allowed to own a firearm. And like that, there's very little that's more explicit. In fact, even in the detraction, even in the minority, the minority vocal opinion, I forgot who wrote it, but they were like, I'm aware that you're protected constitutionally, but it's bad. Like, it was just one of those that it's like, whoa, you're not even pretending to enforce what's actually here anymore. Now that the courts have flipped, you have to worry about the exact opposite side, right? Like, what are they going to say? And of course, there's hope, right? Like we've noted, many Trump things have been struck down by the Supreme Court already. So that's not.
Well, that was before he had that was before he got to appoint 3 justices of his own.
Well, he's like, he's lost. Amy Coney Barrett voted against him recently. Who's the other one? Kavanaugh voted against him recently on another decision as well. So like, these are somewhat recent enough to say that like maybe there's some hope. That being said, I'm still not going to advocate for the Supreme Court. Like I said, they've before in their opinions been like, yeah, I know the law says this, but I feel this. And you're just kind of like, oh, okay, that's bad. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Roe v. Wade is one all 3 of them, I believe, promised not to touch. And then they picked it up and touched the heck out of it. And now there's no Roe v. Wade. So they lied during their confirmation hearings. I guess I just have to handle that, right? Like that's what it is. Abortion's another good example of why I have this issue, right? There are many places that note it's not explicitly illegal to have an abortion. You just need to be able to prove this, that, and the other. A lot of hospitals in those regions are like, that is such a mess to be able to prove those things that we're just not going to do it. Right. Like, and this is a problem with a lot of these executive orders. Like, it's not like people will be like, no, you can still legally do this, Kate. But a lot of places are going to be like, I don't need that smoke. I don't need that danger. I don't want to hire a lawyer every time I perform an abortion. I don't want to, have to go through these hoops to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I did something right. So I'm just going to say no. Right. Like, I'm just not going to do it.
It's de facto. It's a de facto illegal.
Correct.
Even if it's not de jure legal, it's de facto because, it's using the law as terrorism almost.
Yes.
You just effectively have shut people out of performing legal actions because they're afraid of the consequences. So you get these people that are dying in Texas like over and over again because Texas hospitals are just like, yeah, we're not going to do an abortion even if it's medically necessary, because we're not going to let ourselves become an example for Greg Abbott to parade us around as, killing babies or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's just better for us to as you said, de facto banned as opposed to what de jure banned.
Yeah.
Look, so there are reports like this. I got up on the screen, and it's sad because these are legal refugees that had their flights canceled because they're refugees. And why? Now, nothing in the executive order really allows for this. But what you can say is, I was trying to follow the executive order on this ban on immigration, and just an overreaching America first policy, right? And then you just kind of say, oh, okay, well, I guess the safe bet then is to send these 1600 plus legal refugees home. Now, an embarrassing thing about this is, I remember this story. I was like, oh, I can't wait to bring this up with Aaron. As I typed in immigrants sent back to try and find this report again, this is not the only story. There are many legal immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees that did it the right way. They applied, they paid their fees, they paid their blood money, they waited their turn in line, they got the approval, and now they're being sent back to their country. Right? We asked them to do it the right way. They did it the right way, and now they're being sent back anyway. Yeah. Right? And this
I got two things to say about this.
Yeah.
The first one is, this affects me personally. My mother-in-law is currently filling out immigration paperwork.
Oh my God.
We've already filled it out. We already paid $1,700 or so in filing fees a couple of years ago. It took them a couple of years to come back to us and say, yeah, sorry, you forgot, you didn't dot your I's right here, so we're canceling. We're not going to accept this. This was under Biden. We found out maybe like 7 months ago or so, and so we had the opportunity to appeal it by sending in new paperwork. Of course, that's another $1,700 in filing fees, in addition to the fact that we used an attorney this time, so we made sure we didn't screw it up, which cost us another $1,500 or so. And it's like, we're not rich by any means. That's a lot of money for us.
Yeah.
And now we're going to have to be, under the scrutiny of Trump's immigration, and whether or not we'll be accepted under Trump's immigration policies.
Right. Terrible.
Which, to bring me to my second point, Cato, I think it was, did a fantastic analysis of Trump's immigration policy under his first administration. And one of the biggest talking points that Trump and his, sycophants constantly bring up is, we're not against immigration, we're against illegal immigration. They say that constantly. Yeah, this is it. Reduced legal immigration by 63%. It says it right there in the first line. Legal immigration. He cut it constantly. Like all across the board, he cut legal immigration. Like all of the allotments that they allow for various visas and everything like that, across the board, they were slashed. So when Trump and his cronies say, we're not against immigration, we're against illegal immigration, they're lying.
This is bad. I mean, I am profoundly sorry, obviously, for your situation. I mean, this is family. I mean, this
Yeah.
is, and if you look at this, I'm going to go back to this story real quick. These 1,660 Afghan refugees have been taken off of flights. Who do they include? Family members of active duty U.S. military personnel, unaccompanied minors flying back to the U.S. to reunite with family. Unaccompanied minors are being left in Afghanistan to reunite with their family. Okay. And those who fought for the U.S.-backed Afghan government these are among the 1,660 Afghan refugees we're leaving back. Now, going back to your story here, like, as you said, I don't even know what else there is to say, because you said it perfectly. They always say, I'm for legal immigration. You just got to do it the right way. Some of them will even tell you, oh, we should make that easy way a lot easier. Okay. Trump makes this worse, right? Trump made it harder. So if you actually are you're for legal immigration and you understand that system needs to be reformed, why would you support Trump? He's a nightmare if you actually believe that, but they don't actually believe that.
Right.
Or they're willing to look the other way as it happens, or they're genuinely uninformed, in which case that's something we need to tell them about, because apparently some people don't know this. I did not know it was as high as 63%. That is wild. Aaron, I know you've got to go soon, and I will go ahead and feed my family. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we didn't quite get to this week?
No, we covered the highlights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of anything that. I mean, obviously, there's little stuff. The ongoing. Actually, there's one other thing that I want to talk about. It's the ceasefire.
Oh yeah. Yep. I wanted to talk about that. Shoot.
Yeah. What do you think the odds are that it's actually going to be followed?
Already broken, from what I understand, not by the government, but the violence against Palestinians literally the day after it.
Yeah.
Has already happened. The violence is currently ongoing, and then it's heartbreaking, because this is on a personal, cultural level, like Kristallnacht, right? Like, this is one of those where it's like the government doesn't issue an order, but people are doing it, right?
Right.
Like, destroying Palestinian homes and stuff.
Well, there's a major story that just recently came out where, like, civilian settlers went into the West Bank and just started torturing this entire city of Palestinians in West Bank. And as a reminder to people who are not, like, super familiar with the war in Gaza, Gaza and the West Bank are two different complete entities. They're run by different political systems. They're both part of Palestine as a concept, but they're two different autonomous regions. Yeah, and Israeli settlers are just, like, torching the place. And it's not going to create goodwill for a ceasefire when they're already breaking it before it's even started.
Yeah. Again, terrorism doesn't come out of nowhere, right? Like, if I am leaving a place by agreement and I burn your home to the ground before I leave, if some angry terrorist person's like, don't you want some revenge? It takes a lot. It takes a very big person to say no. And when all your neighbors have this happen to them too, you're going to look at each other and be like, well, I'm going to be sleeping in a tent. I've lost my home because of these people. My kids are dead because of these people. Like, is this going to build a rational, hey, peace-loving government? Or is this going to empower people that want revenge? Look no further than Donald Trump in America. We don't even have a lot to get revenge for. But people want comeuppance. People want to see people held, responsible for what they do. And they're willing to embrace some very bad practices and evil in order to get their justice done, right? To be like, yeah, they're bad, but we need an attack dog right now, right? Like, people say this about Trump all the time. We need somebody bad. Yeah, he lies. Yeah, he's a buffoon and mean, but we need somebody mean, right? Like, we need our own angry person. What do you think these people are going to do? Right? Like, how do you think Hamas is still in power? Even though, like, come on, man, like, the ceasefire agreement is not going to last long. In it, and I hate to say that, but, like, not culturally, we can already see it breaking apart, right? As we've mentioned, but Hamas gets to stay in power. Netanyahu stays in power. IDF stays in power. Nothing has functionally changed. The occupied territory is still going to be occupied. The only thing that changed was a few of the civilians let go. For whatever it's worth, Hamas didn't hold up their end of the bargain. They're falling very behind on times. They were supposed to release 33 out of the 250 and then talk about it in exactly 2 weeks after the ceasefire. So it could fall apart in 2 weeks, right? They've released 3 of the 30 of the 250 hostages they have. Like, the hostages aren't even back, right? Like, and they'll say, okay, we'll release 30 of these hostages and then we'll re-talk, and they already didn't do that. So like, everything systematically is just in place for this to happen again and again and again until this gets fixed culturally, until people are actually loving their neighbors. This doesn't change.
Yeah.
You know, the politics follows the culture, and the culture is bad. They hate each other, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
And as we can see from our Bible readings, God loves them both. God has blessed both these people's children. And it is no surprise to me that both seem to incur God's wrath when they kill each other's children, right? Like, we're killing God's children. And yeah, it's all bad. Anything else you wanted to say about that one? I'm sorry.
No, that was the extent of it.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Aaron, thank you again so much for giving me all this extra time to talk with your to talk with me. I know you're kind of 20 minutes past when you said you had to go, but I
we're only 5 minutes past. I'm gonna go get the kiddo to brush her teeth, and we're gonna go back to day 4 of reading Madeline. You familiar with the book?
I've read Madeline books. Yes.
Yeah. So my 5-year-old is now reading it probably 50% by herself.
Hey,
which, that's pretty good.
Steps, man. Good stuff.
Yeah, she's working through it. She's in kindergarten, and she's reading fairly well for being in kindergarten. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
All right,
awesome, man. Hey, good luck to your family. Good luck with the reading. Good luck with your mother-in-law. I hope all that gets ironed out. I'll see you again here next week. Everybody else who tuned in, watched till the end. We grew listeners again as we went longer. I really appreciate you. If you want to come by, link is in the description. Just please, love First Christians. We'd love to have you regardless of your walks of life. Any questions that you've got. We're still going to do the Bible in 1 year, and that'll be what we're doing through this next week. I will see you all next week. Have a good one, and have an excellent rest of your week.